Hi, I'm here today to talk about the epigraphs in House of Leaves. I'm going to go through every epigraph found in the book and just kind of explain the references. So let's just hop right into it, I guess. Our introductory epigraph is in German, and I'm going to apologize for any pronunciations here. You get the epigraph Muss, sein, which is German for do I have to. So this could come from two places actually. It could be from The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera, and this is where a man debates whether to follow his wife to Prague. He says es muss sein, which means he has to, that he is fated to follow her. It's the reverse in House of Leaf, where we see Karen debating whether to follow Navidson into the hallway, and she is fated to do so. Or it could be from Beethoven's String Quartet number 16 in F major, Operation 135. The last movement is called The Difficult Decision. So before the finale of the song, a brief slow introduction followed by an energetic allegro, Beethoven wrote Der schwere gefasst Einschalts, the decision reached with difficulty or the difficult resolution. Beneath it, he wrote the three-note motif of the slow introduction with the words Muss es sein, must it be, followed by the two three-note motifs that make up the Allegro's principal theme, underlaid with the words es muss sein, it must be, it must be. And this was Beethoven's last composition, confronting, that end of things, which I think is fitting for House of Leaves. Chapter 1 epigraph is I saw a film today, oh boy. It's from A Day in the Life by the Beatles. The next line is what I think is more interesting than this first line, and that is, but I just had to look having read the book. So we are reading a book about a film. I thought that was interesting. Chapter 2's epigraph is the labors of men of genius, however erroneously directed, scarcely ever fail in ultimately turning to the solid advantage of mankind. From Mary Shelley, from Frankenstein, the creation of a man or a monster. It speaks to one or more of the characters not being real or being created by another character. Is the sun the Minotaur? Is the Minotaur created? Is the sun created? Who knows? It's a creation of something that seems real, but is it actually real? And what happens when you release that creation into the world? Chapter 3, we get two epigraphs. The first one is, it is no accident that the photographer becomes a photographer any more than the lion tamer becomes a lion tamer, by Dorothea Lange. This is from her essay on morality of photography profession, and I actually have another quote from here that I think is relative to House of Leaves. For in his natural zeal to master the craft, he has too long relied upon the technical to engage his energies. Now the technical has relaxed its challenges, he is often left with the feeling that there is nowhere to go. He is lost, he is confused, he is bewildered, accustomed to discover, now suddenly he is obliged to interpret. I think that's fitting for both Navidson, Zampino, Johnny Truant in the context of House of Leaves there. And even the readers. We're no longer discovering something, we're interpreting House of Leaves. I think even if you are just reading it for the first time and for fun, you're still involved in different interpretations of it. The second epigraph for chapter 3 is, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt? And then Moses questions God about who he is, who Moses is. And God's response is, I will be with you. Which is interesting. And I like to juxtapose this with another verse from the Bible, Matthew 27:46, where Jesus is on the cross and he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you no longer with me? And I think those two juxtapositions fit into House of Leaves. This concept of the house as God, right? And the concept of it being there for you, and then forsaking you at the same time. Chapter 4, we have a quote from one Deirdre Knickerbocker. Faith, sir, as to that matter, I don't believe one half of it myself. Dietrich Knickerbocker is a fictional character from The History of New York by Washington Irving. So here we have a fictional character being quoted maybe as if he's real, because he would have quoted Washington Irving instead of Dietrich Knickerbocker, but he didn't there. We also have another story by Irving, the Sleepy Hollow story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which ends with the postscript questioning the authenticity of that story. So again, we have House of Leaves questioning which part of the stories are true or not true. Is it all made up? Who knows? Chapter 5. We have this quote, "Raju welcomed the intrusion, something to relieve the loneliness of the place," attributed to R.K. Narayan, and this is from his book called The Guide. And that is actually about a tour guide who becomes a prisoner, who gets mistaken for a Swami upon his release, which is a spirit guide, and he becomes a Swami, even though he's not, but what he is perceived to be, he becomes. He lives in an abandoned temple. He only gains his identity through the perception of others. He becomes what he believes, and because others believe he is such. It's like a tulpa, which is a concept that we can create a being through belief. Chapter 6, again, we have 2 epigraphs. I'll just do them separately. The first says, "Animals lack a symbolic identity and the self-consciousness that goes with it. They merely act and move reflexively as they are driven by their instincts. If they pause at all, it is only a physical pause. Inside they are anonymous, and even their faces have no name. They live in a world without time, pulsating, as it were, in a state of dumb being. The knowledge of death is reflective and conceptual, and animals are spirited. They live and they disappear with the same thoughtlessness. A few minutes of fear, a few seconds of anguish, and it is over. But to live a whole lifetime with the fate of death haunting one's dreams, and even the most sun-filled days, that's something else." Ernest Becker. And this is from his book, The Denial of Death, which is about the human pursuit of immortality projects, in which we create or become part of something that we feel will outlast our time on Earth. So in doing so, we feel that we become heroic and part of something eternal that will never die. Like any of the characters all creating something. A movie, a book, a diary, a sun, that kind of thing. The second epigraph is, "While the pragmatic space of animals is a function of inborn instincts, man has to learn what orientation he needs in order to act." This is from Christian Norberg Schulz. It's from Concept of Space, which is an essay on architecture. The epigraph of that book is actually interesting, so I'll read that here too. "Like the spider with its web, so every subject spins out, like the spider's threads, its relations to certain qualities of things, and weaves them into a solid web which carries its existence." And I think that's interesting because, you know, it's kind of what we try to do with the text, is we try to bring all these things together and create this web. You know, I haven't done it yet, but it's close to creating, you know, that wall with all the quotes and then the red string connecting them all together like a spider web. So this essay is about what constitutes a creature is not just the pieces which make up the physical body, but also the surrounding the creature perceives as well. So we are not just our bodies, we are our surroundings as well. Chapter 7, epigraph. "But all this, the mysterious far-reaching hairline trail, the absence of sun from the sky, the tremendous cold, and the strangeness and weirdness of it all, made no impression on the man. It was not because he was long used to it. He was a newcomer in the land, a Chichaquo, and this was his first winter. The trouble with him was that he was without imagination," from Jack London's To Build a Fire. So this is from a story about a man named Man in an inhospitable environment. In the 1902 version of the story, the man dies, but it was actually changed in 1905 to a version where the man lives but he has frostbite. It's an altered storyline that exposes the artificiality of the story. It's also interesting that we have Chichaco, which means a person new to Alaska. This was particularly used for the gold rush, but we also have Johnny working in Alaska. You know, he survived a boat crash, he watched someone die. He's had these experiences similar to Man in To Build a Fire. Chapter 8 begins with this epigraph. SOS, a wireless code signal summoning assistance in extreme distress, used especially by ships at sea. The letters are arbitrarily chosen as being easy to transmit and distinguish. The signal was recommended at the Radio Telegraph Conference in 1906 and officially adopted at the Radio Telegraph Convention in 1908. See G.G. Blake, Hist. Radio Telegraph. It's supposed to say telegraph, but it's cut short. 1926, 111 to 12, the Oxford English Dictionary. G.G. Blake is George G. Blake, and his book reference there is The History of the Radio, Telegraphy, and Telephony. It's 16 chapters with 4 appendices on the history of wireless communications, written in 1926. I found a copy of the table of contents. That's all I was able to find on this. It seems a very extensive history, considering that this is only in 1926. So I'll leave a link to that down below. So in chapter 9 we get a series of 3 epigraphs. I'm not going to read them in the Latin or whatever language they're written in. I'll just tell you the translated versions. So the first one is, "Here is the toil of that house and the inextricable wandering," from Virgil. The next one is the House of Difficult Exit by Essentius, and the other one is Difficult to Enter by Nicholas Trevett. And we also have the X there, and that means unable to proceed. If you see page 582 in House of Leaves, that's what that symbol means. So Virgil is the author of the Aeneid. This is about finding a new home for the Trojan people. And in book 6, Aeneas goes to the temple for Apollo, built by Daedalus, who also built the labyrinth for the Minotaur. And next to the temple is an entrance to a maze that leads to the underworld, which is also significant for House of Leaves. He sees an urn showing Pasiphae's copulation with the bull and the birth of the Minotaur there. This urn is guarded by the Cumaean Sibyl. If you look at page 642 in House of Leaves, we get a reference to her. And she tells him not to look at the urn, saying, "This moment doesn't require your sightseeing." So I thought that was really interesting to include, because we have this concept of this Minotaur, this sun, and whether we should be looking at this book. This book isn't for you. We shouldn't be looking at it. I think that's this interesting connection there. Essentius, also known as Jodocus Badius. That's a cool name. I'm just gonna say it. Jodocus Badius, Essentius, however you want to pronounce it. He was a pioneer in the printing press industry, and his quote is actually a reference to books and publishing. Then we also have Nicholas Trevett, and he was a Dominican friar, and this quote actually comes from his commentary on City of God by Augustine. So we have this commentary on a book in a book. That's a commentary on films with commentary on the book. It gets really meta. And also this whole concept of City of God and House of God, or the house being God, or the city being God, all conflates together. Then on to chapter 10. The epigraph reads, "Every house is an architecturally structured path. The specific possibilities of movement and the drive towards movement as one proceeds from the entrance through the sequence of spatial entities have been predetermined by the architectural structuring of that space, and one experiences the space accordingly. But at the same time, in its relation to the surrounding space, it is a goal, and we either advance toward this goal or depart from it." Dagobert Frey. So interesting concept that house is a path, whatever. Dagobert Frey is a Nazi, like very Nazi. Not just someone who happened to be German in Nazi times, but like an active participant of the Nazi beliefs. He wrote a book trying to deny the existence of Jews in Europe. And then also denying the Slavic origins of Poland to justify the Nazi occupation and taking over Poland. He also stole valuable art from Krakow and Warsaw during the Nazi occupation of Poland, and he wrote this book on art, translated as Foundation for Comparative Art Study. So yeah, very much a Nazi. Interesting. This is only the first Nazi quoted in House of Leaves, which is kind of worrisome. Chapter 11 epigraph. There's a translation provided in the book, which you can go and read. But I prefer this direct translation that I did instead. So, the poet in the dungeon, bedraggled, sickly, rolling a manuscript under his convulsive foot, measure of a look that terror inflames, the dizzying staircase where his soul is an abyss. Written by Charles Baudelaire. Yeah, I just like that translation better than the one provided because I think it fits in more with House of Leaves. You know, this dizzying staircase that's an abyss. Rolling a manuscript under your foot, you know, walking all over it, which we could argue that, you know, like maybe Johnny does or the editors do or something along those lines. And the concept of this poet stuck in a dungeon and sickly writing these things. Maybe Zampano's, you know, living space could be akin to a dungeon. Charles Baudelaire is an interesting person. He coined the term modernity, meaning fleeting, ephemeral experiences of life in the urban metropolis, and the responsibility of the artistic expression to capture that. So, urban metropolis, houses, I know the Navicens were trying to get away from that, but we still have this concept of the house. Chapter 12's epigraph. Not every cave search has a Terry Tarkington who knows the cave like his own home. 6 months earlier, 3 boys had vanished from the face of the earth near a similar Missouri cave they had been exploring. Despite week-long search operations of incredible extent, they remain missing to this day. William R. Halliday, MD, American Caves and Caving. So first of all, Terry Tarkington wrote a lot of books and guides about caves, so he knows his caves. That's a reference to him. But the 3 boys are more interesting. They're called the Lost Boys of Hannibal. They're 3 boys who went exploring this place called Murphy's Cave, and they disappeared and have never been found to this day, as far as my research showed. There are Billy Hoeg, who was 10, Joey Hoeg, who was 13, and Craig Dowell, who was 14. So here we have 2 brothers and a friend, kind of like the Navicens and their friend. So chapter 13, we have part of a quote from The Other Tiger by Jorge Borges. And I'm just going to read the full poem to you here. I think of a tiger. The gloom here makes the vast and busy library seem lofty and pushes the shelves back. Strong, innocent, covered with blood and new, it will move through its forest, its morning, and will print its tracks on the muddy margins of a river whose name it does not know. In its world there are no names, nor past, nor time to come, only the fixed moment, and will overleap barbarous distances and will scent out the plaited maze of all the scent of dawn, and the delighting scent of the deer. Between the strips of bamboo I decipher its stripes and have the feeling of the bony structure that quivers under the glowing skin. In vain do the curving seas intervene and the deserts of the planet. From this house in a far-off port in South America I pursue and dream you, O tiger on the Ganges banks. In my soul the afternoon grows wider, and I reflect that the tiger invoked in my verse is a ghost of a tiger, a symbol, a series of literary tropes and memories from the encyclopedia, and not the deadly tiger, the fateful jewel that under the sun or the varying moon in Sumatra or Bengal goes on fulfilling its rounds of love, of idleness and death. To the symbolic tiger I have opposed the real thing with its warm blood that decimates the tribes of the buffaloes, and today, the 3rd of August, 59, stretches on the grass of a deliberate shadow, but already the fact of naming it and conjecturing its circumstances makes it a figment of art, and no creature living among those that walk the earth. We shall seek a 3rd tiger. This will be like those others, a shape of my dreaming, a system of words a man makes, and not the vertebrate tiger, that beyond the mythologies is treading the earth. I know well enough that something lays on me this quest, undefined, senseless, and ancient, and I go on, seeking through the afternoon time, the other tiger, that which is not in verse. So this poem and the ideas referenced throughout it, and throughout the chapter that it precedes, is about the interplay of literature, imagination, and reality. So I think the poem is very important in its full length, not just the page quoted. The poem also references the date August 3rd. And if we look at the Pelican poems, the one on page 576, dated August 3rd, we come across the poem, Pelican transpires by his cup of tea and decides to try his hand at conjuring. Conjuring what? A tiger? This book? Who knows? Mark C. Danilowski actually wrote these poems, and he conjured up this tiger of a book. He admitted to writing the poems in a similar situation while he was on a trip in Europe. And we also have this other quote from Borges that I wanted to include from one of his short stories. I am withdrawing to write a book, and another time I am withdrawing to construct a labyrinth. Everyone imagined two works. To no one did it occur that the book and the maze were one and the same thing. Chapter 14, Epigraph. Let you be stripped of your purple dyes, for I too once in the wilderness with my wife had all the treasure I wished. Attributed to Enkidu. Yeah. Enkidu. That person from Gilgamesh. The quote is from him cursing a woman until he's reminded of the good that she did for him, and then he turns around and blesses her. So that's interesting that we have this woman being initially cursed and then blessed after memories of her. Enkidu is a wild man. He may be the bull man that's depicted often in Mesopotamian art. He's the opposite of the city man, Gilgamesh. Could Navson be Gilgamesh and Tom be Enkidu? There's another link there. We do have chapter 11, which is about Esau, the wild man, and Jacob, the home or the city man. Together, Enkidu and Gilgamesh kill the bull of heaven, and Enkidu is punished and dies because of this. And we see Tom also dying in the house. Enkidu was also known as the night herd keeper. His role is the measurement of the passage of time at night, which is interesting because we know the house is dark. Enkidu was also half-brother to Gilgamesh. He was sent to the underworld by Gilgamesh, and he broke all the rules while he was there. And one of the rules was to wear no purple clothes or makeup. And we actually see purple affiliated with Pelafina. And is she dead? Is she in the underworld? Is the house the underworld? Again, all these questions, right? Chapter 15. The quote here is referenced by Freud, which we see in the footnotes. There's no translation provided, so I'll translate it here for you. It's from the Book of Songs. It's poem number 58, and this is the whole poem. This world, this life are fragments unconnected, but I, a German teacher, have selected the scattered fragments he together tags in an intelligible combination, and with nightcap's rags stops up all the holes and completes creation. So this is about connecting life's fragments to create meaning. Like we're trying to collect all these references to create meaning, but ultimately meaning is a creation in itself. Chapter 16, Epigraph. When mathematical propositions refer to reality, they are not certain. When they are certain, they do not refer to reality. From Albert Einstein. This is from Geometry and Experience by him. So math cannot describe reality because numbers can't adequately describe, mimic, or interpret perception. So this page is not about, it's interesting because this page is about geography, not geometry. And this inadequacy of math may be why there are so many redacted or ineligible parts in this chapter. So there's no point in including it if it's not going to add anything to the story. Or my personal theory that Mark C. Danilowski didn't know enough math to include it in the story, so he just solved that by having everything blanked out. Chapter 17, we have another poem, this one by Rilke, and it goes, whoever you are, go out in the evening, leaving your room of which you know each bit. Your house is the last before the infinite, whoever you are. And it's interesting, the name of this poem is called Entering, and we have a continuation of the poem that I will read here. With your eyes, which in their weariness barely free themselves from the worn-out threshold, you lift very slowly one black tree, and place it against the sky, slender, alone, and you have made the world. And it is huge, and like a word which grows ripe in silence, and as your will seizes on its meaning, tenderly your eyes let it go. And I wanted to bring up the tree as significant because of the many references throughout House of Leaves to Yggdrasil, the tree in Norse mythology, and the idea of the tree being the world or a bridge to the worlds, or the underworld. You know, I thought it was an interesting idea. This concept between houses and trees and death and everything. The chapter 18 epigraph reads, "Ash good for cask hoops, and if need require plough work, as also for many things else," by Thomas Harriot. Harriot was a mathematician, astronomer, linguist, experimental scientist, and assistant to Sir Walter Raleigh. So he's a polymath, I guess you can call him, similar to Zampano. Harriot went on an expedition with Raleigh to actually Roanoke. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I've always called it Roanoke. It could be Roanoke or something like that. What's it called? The city that disappeared in early American history. The text also tells a story of a native man who rose from the grave to tell people about the underworld. So that's an interesting thing. Some other uses of ash, very significant tree, includes making stairs. And I'm going to quote this directly from Wikipedia because I couldn't say it any better myself. Its robust structure, good looks, and flexibility combine to make ash ideal for staircases. Ash stairs are extremely hard-wearing, which is particularly important for treads. Due to its elasticity, ash can also be steamed and bent to produce curved stair parts. So what was the grand staircase made out of? Perhaps ash. Yggdrasil was an ash tree. Asker means ash. He was the first man in Norse mythology, so we go back to this idea of creation. Malay, I'll put the word on the screen because I know I'm not pronouncing it right, are Greek nymphs of the ash tree, and they are born of blood dropped on earth from Gaia. When Cronus castrated Uranus, they were the nurses to the infant Zeus. So creation twice, once from blood and then of a son who became a god. I just thought that was an interesting thing to include. Chapter 19 epigraph. Contrary to what Weston asserts, the habit of photographic seeing, of looking at reality as an array of potential photographs, creates estrangement from, rather than union with, nature. Susan Sontag on photography. So Sontag had this idea that photography was established within a people, a chronic voyeuristic relation to the world around them. All events are leveled and made equal because of photography. One who seeks to record cannot intervene. One who intervenes cannot record. Obviously, this is a reference to Navidson's interference or lack of early enough interference in the Delilah photograph, and his guilt in being a photographer and being estranged from humanity. Chapter 20, again we have two epigraphs. The first one, "No one should brave the underworld alone." It's attributed to Poe, and notice that it's just Poe, not Edgar Allan Poe. This is not an Edgar Allan Poe quote. This is actually a quote from Mark Z. Danilewski's sister, whose stage name is Poe. Yes. She wrote an album in conjunction with this book, and I think the song Hello is particularly significant. And some lines in there, or one line in particular. "I can't see your face, but you left a trace on a data back road." And we know from interpreting one of Pelafina's letters that we get this quote, "A face in a cloud, no trace in the crowd," and a data back road could be the cloud backup, right? So we have this face in the data back road and leaving no trace. I just thought that was interesting. Other quotes from that song that I feel are significant. "Mothers are trails on stars in the night. Fathers are black holes that suck up the light." And "I can't believe the guy could be entirely dead." Go listen to the song. The second one is Braille, and the translation provided is mostly accurate. There is one mistake, however. In the section that says, "You will never find a mark there," the small m is actually supposed to be a capital M. So "You will never find a Mark Z. Danilewski there." It calls into question the authorship. Again, you know, the death of the author, how much of the author's life affects the text, which we can argue is quite a bit if you just look up Redwood in relation to House of Leaves. But that's a video for another day. So I just thought that was interesting. Chapter 21. We're almost there, people. The epigraph reads, "We felt the lonely beauty of the evening, the immense roaring silence of the wind, the tenuousness of our tie to all below. There was a hint of fear, not for our lives, but of a vast unknown which pressed in upon us. A fleeting feeling of disappointment that after all those dreams and questions, this was only a mountaintop. Gave way to the suspicion that maybe there is something more, something beyond the three-dimensional form of the moment, if only it could be perceived." Said by Thomas Hornbean. So Hornbean and Unsold, again, the names up here, tried to climb Mount Everest via the difficult West Ridge, but they didn't succeed, and actually Unsold lost his toes to frostbite. It's interesting, there's lots of references to toes and feet in House of Leaves. Yeah, so what happens if you lose those toes? Another quote from Hornbean I thought was relevant is, "The night was overwhelmingly empty. The black silhouette of the Lhotse mountain was lurking there, half to see, half to assume, and below of us. In general, there was nothing. We hung in a timeless gap, pained by intensive cold air, and had the idea not to be able to do anything but to shiver and to wait for the sun rising." And this kind of reminded me of Navidson's last adventure in the house, with a lot of nothingness and timelessness going on. A lot of having to just, I can't even say sit around, because was he sitting? Floating around and waiting. Chapter 22, the epigraph reads, "Truth transcends the telling," attributed to Ino. So Ino is also known as Ino of the beautiful ankles. Just those weird Greeks, right? Homer wrote that about her. Another reference to feet. We're close to it enough. Is anyone else beginning to think that Mark C. Danilewski may have a foot fetish? Or is that just me? Anyways, she is a Maenad, known for tearing her children limb from limb. She killed her son by boiling him, and then committed suicide by jumping into the sea. Her other son was hunted and killed by his father. Then she was made into a goddess and given the name Leucothea as a divine aid to Odysseus on his journey back home. And Ino never actually said this, so I think this might just be someone saying "I know" instead of that. But the references to Ino, I think, are interesting in relation to House of Leaves. Journeying back home, children killing her son, especially the reference to boiling. As we know, Johnny's arms were damaged by boiling water in the presence of his mother. Yeah. Last reference, chapter 23. There's supposed to be a picture here. It wasn't included for whatever reason. Could be a practical reason that they couldn't print it. Could just be that he didn't want you to think it exists, but it does exist. It's a real picture of a house still standing, surrounded by an ocean of hardened lava after a volcano eruption destroyed much of that town. So a singular house surviving destruction. And that's where we're going to leave it. And that's where House of Leaves doesn't leave us there. There's a whole bunch of other stuff after that that happens, but with regard to the epigraphs, that's the last of them. Let me know what you think of the epigraphs in House of Leaves. Do you think they have any meaning? Do you think there's any meaning to be found in House of Leaves? Because the further I do all these references and looking into things, the further I think that the book is just ultimately meaningless, but a fun puzzle nonetheless. Thank you for watching.